the farmers so that you manage the expectations at the very early stages of the product process. Then there's the issues of cost. There's need for leverage in technology, where you could probably, most companies have developed, I think even in our Kenyan example, the payouts are basically made through the mobile wallets, what we call back at home the M-Pesa. So you do not really expect the farmers to come to the insurance company to be paid checks or to be given cash as payouts for their losses on the ground. So there is need for leverage in technology. Also on operations and partners, there is need to focus more on farmers' needs. A very good example that we were given is the case of Sanasa Insurance in Sri Lanka, where they plan to adopt automated weather stations which are linked to an online database. And also they are coming up with hybrid products, this I've just mentioned, where you combine both index and indemnity products in one product, so that if the index-based portion of the product does not trigger payout as a result of the actual happenings on the ground, the farmers could lose their crops as a result of pest infestation or even any other peril on the ground, which is not really what the index was supposed to measure. But still, the farmers would still be able to be paid as a result of coming up with an hybrid product. There's also the need for coordination of stakeholders, where we talk about multi-stakeholder steering committees. A very good example was given from Thailand, where the Ministry of Finance, the Department of Agriculture Extension, Ministry of Agriculture and Cooperatives, Bank of Agriculture and Agriculture Cooperatives, all are coming together to ensure that there is some level of collaboration, and there is need also for them to work together so that the actual products that are sold to the farmers basically meet the needs of the farmers. There are also issues to do with the regulatory matters. Need for a clear framework. Most jurisdictions do not have index insurance regulations. In Kenya, and even for the example of Philippines, in Kenya we do have draft index insurance regulations that were developed in 2014, and they guide the product approval process at the authority at the moment. Much as we are still having them in draft form, they have not been actually enacted into law. But we do follow strictly the provisions in the draft regulations when we are approving these products. And also, there is need to integrate with other risk management measures. We talk about land development, water conservation. A very good example was given from Dan Foundation in India. Next slide. Now, looking forward, the aim is to have small-scale farmers voluntarily buy these products at a competitive price but affordable. Agriculture insurance products also needs to be sold in a very informed manner, where we say product design and distribution needs to stay focused on the needs of the actual farmers, and also to actually focus on the experience on the farmers on the ground. There is also, we have also noticed there are various initiatives being carried out, and some headway has been made, but there's still a long way to go. This is witnessed by lack of clarity among insurance supervisors on how index insurance should be supervised and developed. And also there's need to better integrate agriculture insurance regulation into national disaster risk management strategies as a way of helping the smallholder farmers to deal with the challenges the agriculture result of climatic changes witnessed across the world. I think that is basically a summary of what was discussed in Singapore in February 2017. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. So we can see that there's actually quite a lot of activity happening around the agricultural indexed insurance products. And there are some strategies of overcoming the challenges, but there seems to be quite a long way to go around providing agricultural index insurance products to a wider market in an affordable way that still provides customers value for their products. So that will be, this issue will be discussed further in our panel discussion. So Lebi Manji will be moderating the panel, and I know that a lot of you will know Lemi, but just to introduce Lemi. So Lemi is currently an independent international development consultant. So he has nearly 15 years of professional experience in this area, and he's worked in the areas of microinsurance and microfinance, business development services, and value chain management, along with a number of other areas that he works in. But I'd like to invite Lemi to come up to the panel, as well as our other panel participants. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Janice, for the opportunity and for the introduction. So the panel is the privileged one, because it has an insurer, and it also has insurer broker, and also it has a reinsurer, and also has someone from the regulator. So I'm privileged to moderate this panel, which which includes Flotazio Sande, who is currently the Assistant Director, Market Research and Development at the Insurance Regulatory Authority of Uganda. And prior to this engagement, he was also a lecturer at some universities, including Makerere University, and now he's actually the coordinator of the National Agriculture Insurance Scheme on the side of the Regulatory Authority. So may I invite Sande now to come up front. The next panelist is Rahab Karaoke, and she is the Managing Director at ECA Africa, which provides innovative insurance solutions to farmers across Africa. And she was heavily involved at the start of her involvement in agriculture index insurance with the Syngenta Foundation's Kilimo Salamo project for 5 years. And now she leads, in her role now, she leads the organization in building partnerships across Africa with local regulators, insurers, administrators, and aggregators in terms of reaching out to African farmers across Africa in terms of agriculture insurance. So may I now invite Rahab. The last panelist, but not the least, is Isaac, who I'm privileged to be meeting again after many years. Isaac Mangina is a senior client management and also vice president at Swiss Re Global Partnerships. And at the moment, he's focusing on bridging the gap between the protection gap through public-private sector partnerships and microinsurance programs. Before joining Swiss Re, Isaac was heavily involved in one of the initiatives that also Rahab shares, which is the Syngenta project. And at that time, Isaac was actually the agricultural underwriter at UOP Insurance Limited. So may I now invite Isaac as well. In terms of how the panel will proceed, so each of the panelists will be given 10 minutes to make their presentation, and then we'll have 5 minutes sort of intro questions from myself, and then we'll open up to the panel at the end of all the 3 presentations. So again, it's a privilege to actually have the 3 panelists, and to start with, I will invite Sande to come and make his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to share with you a few insights about the state of agriculture insurance in Uganda. But before I go into the details, I want to start by saying that the subject we are discussing is a difficult one. Difficult when it comes to making it a reality. The story of Uganda's insurance agricultural insurance started a few years ago. Initially, we had about 2-3 companies that had expressed interest in agricultural insurance. But based on the figures, it was quite a difficult thing. From the earlier presentations, agriculture happens to be a backbone of most of the economies in Africa, Uganda not being an exception. And having noted the experience of the few farms that dived into that area, we decided to engage government into supporting agricultural insurance through premium subsidies. Because we cannot talk of agriculture being a backbone of Uganda's economy, for example. The insurers have tried to provide solutions. The farmers are not able to pay the price. So in the year 2016-17, government was kind enough and provided for a premium subsidy of up to 1.5 million US dollars to help reduce the cost of insurance to the farmers. And this subsidy has been structured into two tiers. The major focus was on small-scale farmers. Initially, we were tasked to explain or to define strictly who a small-scale farmer is, so that government is able to monitor the use of the subsidy. And the agreeable definition was that a small farmer is one who farms up to 5 acres of land, or who generates up to 20 million shillings annually as income from agriculture. That was allowed up to 50% premium subsidy. Then the rest were defined as large scale, and they were allowed up to 30% premium subsidy. We are almost ending the financial year 2016-17, but the utilization rates are not very good. Now, what does that mean? That even with the subsidy, it is a little hard to convince a farmer, and I think Owori and Peter raised the same issues, that getting this farmer convinced to commit some resources to buy a promise, which is also not very clear, is quite a hard task. That's why I started by saying that the subject we are discussing is a complex one. Insurance generally is a complex subject. Now imagine convincing a farmer to put aside money. Now in terms of utilization, it is not actually the small-scale farmers who have expressed interest in this and who have benefited thereafter. It is the semi-commercial and commercial farmers. It is still a little hard to get the real small-scale farmer to whom this subsidy was intended on board. And the practitioners have already started discussions to re-engage government to revise the subsidies upwards from 50% to something else. Because even with this subsidy, the premium rates about 5%. Slightly lower, because without it was about 6 to 7. With the subsidy, it's 5%, which is still very hard for a farmer to pay. It becomes even harder with index. The challenges of Africa seem to cut across. Index insurance is successful when you have reliable data. But the historical data that we have is in bits and pieces, meaning that a lot of estimation, a lot of, so it becomes quite hard. So I am glad that we have convened in this meeting to discuss this particular subject. The potential is big. The demand is big. Uganda's economy, about 80% of Ugandans generate a livelihood from agriculture. Close 70% are employed, directly or indirectly, in agriculture. But this agriculture is dependent on nature, on weather, the climate, up to about 80% or so. Very few farmers have adopted the scientific methods. So when the insurers are assessing the risk, they are looking at this farmer who is dependent on nature, the risk management, the risk control measures are minimal, and they want also to make some money. So how would you balance? How would you create a balance between serving the farmer but also sustain yourself in business? That's a difficult question, and which I think we shall need to address ourselves too. Indeed, the issue of partnership therefore becomes very critical. The National Agricultural Insurance Scheme of Uganda has identified key partners. There is the regulator, and the role of the regulator is mainly to approve the products, like Owor mentioned. But we go an extra mile, that when the insurers have issued the policy, we have to review that policy to ensure that it conforms to the specifications that we agreed upon during the policy approval. And once we have convinced ourselves that it's in order, then we write to the Central Bank of Uganda, which is currently holding the account into which the premium subsidy was deposited, for the central government to release the money to the insurer in question. So we already have partners providing values. We have the Meteorological Authority on board, the Uganda Insurers Association, which is currently managing the scheme under an established consortium of 10 insurers, but with membership still open to those who are interested. We have the Ministry of Finance, Planning and Economic Development to provide the resources, but also ensure that the resources are properly utilized. We have mobile payment platforms. We have farmer groups. We have non-government organizations with an interest in food security, among others. Now, what do we think will change the game of agricultural insurance in Uganda and perhaps elsewhere? Number one, the issue of subsidy is a must. Because I have had some discussions, even with very developed economies, subsidies still exist. Ours is still a pilot. We are told that if the utilization is not very good, maybe it will be withdrawn. But I imagine that when that happens, that will be the end of agricultural insurance in Uganda. So subsidies are a must. Number two is consumer education. I wouldn't wish to call it awareness, because awareness to me is plain. They need to know. They need to understand. And this goes beyond just informing them. So education is very important. Mass education campaigns. And this requires a lot of resources in terms of investment. Unfortunately, our scheme is tied. It's like tied aid. 0% of that money is spent on education and awareness. The players have to mobilize resources to do that kind of education, and perhaps that explains why the utilization rates are still low. So as we sit here, we have to look at ways of ensuring that the customer is aware. They need to understand, and that requires consistency in terms of the message that we provide to them. Number 3, I'm from the regulator, but I think there will also be need for regulatory flexibility. This is a unique line of business, and therefore the general rules may not apply. In Uganda, to be an insurance agent, you need minimum qualification of a certificate of proficiency. That may not prevail for agriculture insurance. Perhaps some other form of insurance that would, of training that would be recognized. Because it's very hard to get these people down to the villages where most of the farmers are. So to improve on the distribution and manage the distribution costs, there will be need for flexibility on the side of regulations that are governing agriculture insurance. There are challenges, certainly, not very different from what has been echoed by the previous speakers. The farmer is a complex consumer. And just one claim, a word mentioned, a farmer has suffered a loss, but you are telling him that because the index trigger did not work, you are not going to be paid. That will kill it. You know, when you do something bad in quotes, it spreads much faster than if this farmer received the payment. So that's one of the challenges. And it can be handled perhaps by the education that we talked about, or combining a combination of the weather and the indemnity insurance, so that if the other side does not pay, there is something small from the indemnity. The other challenge, of course, are the costs associated with distribution. I already proposed regulatory flexibility, establishing a sales points or sales points across the various districts and villages and sub-counties will be very costly on the side of the insurer. And therefore, there will be need for the regulators to recognize other salespersons with minimal basic training to sell this kind of insurance. And thirdly, the issue of funding is a challenge. Funding the awareness, funding the technology. Because if farmers are spread everywhere, how do you collect the premiums? There has to be a platform which can enable communication between the farmers and the insurers. I want to end there for now, and I would be glad to answer some questions during the discussions. Thank you very much for listening.
Maybe just whilst it's fresh, just a couple of questions for you, Sunday. The first one, you've highlighted the need for investments in education. I'm just wondering, in the first dialogue between public sector and private sector, since you're talking about 10 companies involved, whether that was tabled and there was willingness from private sector to get involved. And then you talked about the issue of regulatory flexibility. Again, it would be nice to ask you what has been done in actually developing a regulatory framework, as you said, which will be flexible to accommodate also different aggregators to be involved in terms of distribution. So, and then of course the last one is, you mentioned the issue of clarity of the promise that we make in insurance. I would also want to add to say what has been the demonstration now of the fulfillment of that promise, which can now be used in consumer education as well. Perhaps those three, and then we can move on to the next presenter. The other one, the big button.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Beginning with the issue of consumer education. In the design of this scheme, I said that there is a consortium of 10 insurance companies. Now, because there was no allowance to finance consumer education from the subsidy which was provided by government, the various insurance companies entered into a memorandum of understanding where they agreed to pool resources for purposes of consumer education. So that has been done. But, as I said, consumer education requires massive investment. I am not so sure, I'm glad there are some in the house, some insurers from that consortium. I'm not so sure how much of what they pooled has remained. You may be surprised that it did not perhaps take 3 months having been pooled, meaning that the remaining part of the year, there is literally no education that is running. On the side of the regulatory flexibility, just like our counterparts in Kenya, we also have a draft index insurance regulation in place, and some few proposals which make the regulator a little flexible when it comes this particular line of business have been incorporated. It is a draft, but I'm almost certain that maybe in a few months' time it will become operational. And being part of government, on one hand, and of course one of our roles is to develop the insurance market, we are very passionate about supporting agricultural insurance. So it is something that we are interested in. It is something that we shall drive up to a fruition. What has been the demonstration to make the promises clearer? Some work has been done, especially with the development partners that have interest in food security. I have seen some demonstrations of the entire process, from underwriting to the claims. But these demonstrations have been limited in terms of spreading out to the intended beneficiaries, the public, because of, again, the same reason. How do you roll this one out to ensure that it reaches the last man, south, north, east, and west? Otherwise, in terms of infrastructure, a lot of work has been done, a lot of demonstrations exist, but spreading them up to the intended beneficiaries remains a challenge due to the financial constraints. Thank you.
And any payouts?
The payouts, there are some insurers in the house. I will ask, I can ask if you allow me, Mr. Chair. There is Zawede. Zawede has been very active in the consortium. Maybe she can confirm that. Zawede is right there.
Let's rush to the front so we can just use this mic.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we have had some payouts. We did suffer a hard drought in 2016. So we have had, and there are so farmers who did get the subsidy have benefited, and I think it's still going on here.
Thank you so much. On that note, I'll still open up for questions to Sunday after all the 3 presentations. I'll now like to invite Rahab to make her presentation.
Allow me to present from here. I'm not very lucky today. I don't think you'll see me behind there. So just allow me to present from here. I hope I'm audible enough. So my presentation will focus on 2 examples, 2 challenges that we've faced in the past, and how we overcame them by negotiating extra roles with the stakeholders that we are working with. So on to my first slide. I think I'll just quickly start with an introduction of who Africa is. So we design microinsurance products, specifically focusing on agriculture. and support local insurance companies to take those products to the market. We're not an insurance company, we're not an insurance broker, but it's like a brokerage role. So we're involved in understanding the risks farmers are facing, packaging that into an insurance product, and helping the insurance companies also negotiate the reinsurance. So we're involved on both sides of the product, basically. Next slide. So on to my first challenge. In the year 2009, when we were ready to start, we knew that our first product, our first solution was going to be a weather index product. And we knew which part of the country in Kenya we would start because we had identified a part of the country where a lot of weather data was available, a lot of research had been done. But we had a challenge. We needed to identify how farmers were going to access the product. We had even installed 2 weather stations. So at the time, then our next stop was to microfinance institutions because it seems obvious that credit should go with insurance. So that was our first stop. We went to microfinance institutions. And their reply was they're not convinced that our intended beneficiaries, that farmers will actually take up insurance. So they say, go prove your concept, come back. So we had a problem in our hands. We needed to find a way that this product could be accessed by farmers. And our most obvious channel was not going to work, at least not at that time. So then we went out and did a survey. We asked farmers, how do you want to receive these services? How can we reach you? And the first thing among the many things that they told us is that they do not want to talk to an insurance salesman. So that came out very clearly, that they do not trust them, they're not sure they understand what they are saying. So then we had to go back to the drawing board, and I remember the solution actually came from Isaac at the time, because he was involved in the program. And we said, how about the agro-input shops? They trust these local businessmen, they buy their seeds and fertilizer from there. They already naturally go there for advice. So we then went back to the regulator and said, the regulatory framework does not allow agro-input shops to distribute insurance. And I think we've already had about some of those constraints already. They needed to have a COP, a proficiency exam. They needed to have an annual license, the usual requirements, which would not fit this class of people that we were targeting. So the regulator in Kenya was very flexible. So this is one thing that we were able to negotiate. That if we demonstrated that we had trained these agro-input shops enough, if we could show how the money could be traced, all these transactions could be traced from each of these shops to the insurance company, if we could prove that there will be some form of information passed by these agro-input shops to the farmers, then they would allow it. So, the regulator said, we will observe, let's see how this works. If it doesn't work out very well, we will quickly shut it down. So with that, actually for the first 3 years, that was our main channel of distribution. We used agro-input shops to distribute weather index solutions. So farmers would walk into the shop, they're buying a bag of seed, they're buying a bag of fertilizer, and they would say, I want that with insurance. So the insurance, the agro-input shop would have a simple mobile phone. It was a Nokia mobile phone, and there was a mobile application installed, so it would calculate the premium required. They would tell the farmer how much that will be. They will collect that in cash. And then, because now we have a track of who the farmer is, their phone number, where they are located, which shop they have purchased from, then at the end of the week or the month, these agro-input shops would accumulate the amounts and send them via mobile money to the insurance company. So that way we were able to overcome our first challenge. We have since discontinued that channel of distribution because questions started coming up about the business case. What's in it for us? The agro-input shops. So obviously margins or commissions, admin fees, whatever we want to call them, from insurance are not enough. If you think of the opportunity cost, those 5 minutes spent explaining about insurance instead of selling a bag of fertilizer, we cannot compensate. The trade-off is too high for the agro-input shop. So what we are working on now is figuring out what kind of incentive these agro-input shops need. It's probably not a cash incentive. It will be something to do with, through the insurance program, more farmers are coming back to your shop, maybe handing out a physical bag as compensation, which means more business for the agro-input shop. But we're still studying that. Next slide. So our next challenge, and I think this one is more obvious, is we are asking farmers to, through insurance, to trust the insurance company, to give us their money, and then later, maybe if the loss we are talking about happens, they will get their money back. So it's a very difficult proposition compared to credit, where the farmer needs to, the bank needs to trust the farmer to give them money. It's the other way around. So then the challenge that we came to was that farmers were telling us they do not want to buy insurance alone. They do not believe that it's a complete solution. And I know this might sound controversial, but this is what farmers are saying. They're still saying that. They're saying that they want value-added insurance. They want insurance to be part of something else, part of input access, part of credit, part of climate information services, part of something else that they have a hard time accessing. So then this is a case for bundling. It's a case for partnerships. And one example of that we have done to overcome this challenge is a partnership we currently have with Vision Fund International. So what we have negotiated with them is when we find a group of farmers, they've been aggregated, for example, they're members of a cooperative, but they have a hard time to access credit, we will ask Vision Fund, any local MFI in the countries we are working, to come in and look at it and negotiate whether they can provide credit. The only condition is that the credit will have to come with insurance. Now you realize what I'm saying is that farmers were looking for credit, not insurance. These farmers are already aggregated. They're already producing for a known market, or they're organized for one reason or the other, but they are lacking access to credit. So the MFI then makes it a condition that the credit will have to come with insurance. So that way now the insurance is part of something the farmer is looking for, and it's a partnership that works for us. It's a win-win for everybody. So I guess for the case of bundling, there are many other examples. There are other unlikely partners that we could think of. We have discussed the possibility of medical insurance being added to the seed insurance that we are providing. We have the plans to look at epidemics being added to crop insurance, and many other plans. We've had life insurance being added to dairy insurance, partnerships with organizations that are providing farmer profile information, or just a farmer profile service, and looking at how insurance information can be added as part of the SMSs that they are sending to farmers as a value add. In conclusion, my last slide, and I think there's not much to say here. Peter had a good slide that showed the orchestra of all the parties involved. I was just going to mention that the way we are looking at it is that there are 5 classifications of the many different partners that are involved in this sector. And we've already seen the long list from Peter. But what we are seeing is a gap that these different layers at the macro level, at the meso and the micro level are not very well coordinated. There's a lot of work happening at the public sector, at the with the development banks and people who are financing weather index solutions. There's a lot that's happening in the middle with the knowledge creators, with data providers really working towards improving their solutions, but not enough happening with those on the ground who are actually talking to farmers. So what I would ask for is that coordination and more synergies in connecting the work that's going on, or the efforts that are going on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rahab. Very informative, and just a couple of questions for you. So the issue of scale, what has been the drivers, the main drivers of scale in your business model? And also, what are you learning in terms of creating the balance between client value and the business case? And then you talked about bundling as a strategy that has emerged from farmer concerns. Any insights on value-added services as well? And then finally, you talked about aggregator incentives. So I think the case for Miguel Solana was largely drawn by the use of agro-dealers, and now you're struggling. So if you end up not having incentives that will get them hooked, what are the alternative distribution channels to still get to the farmers?
The question of scale is a difficult one because we are still trying to figure it out. We are still trying to get to a point where farmers will knowingly and willingly buy an insurance product that is fairly priced, in which case we can say we are getting to a point of scale. But over the last 8 years, we have reached over 1.3 million farmers cumulatively, and last year alone we reached 465,000. So we can say that we are learning a lot in the process, and what has seemed to be driving this kind of uptake is partnerships. We do not talk to individually, these 500,000 farmers. So what we have done is to create partnerships with aggregators, different institutions who we think insurance would add value to what they're doing. So what we have done is to look at the seed distribution, fertilizer distribution, value chains, to look at off-takers, and also to look at credit, financial institutions. And so, there's still a long way to go in just tracking all the different services that farmers are accessing and making sure that we are maximizing those opportunities. But even after we are done with that, you realize that there are more farmers who are not taking credit, farmers who are not part of a cooperative, farmers who are not buying a hybrid seed. So the masses are out there. And to get there, we really have to figure that out. I think someone mentioned in the conference, the main conference that was going on, that it will include trust, it will include accessibility, it will include affordability, it will also include awareness. So this is an effort that I think cannot be done by one organization, cannot be done in 1 year. It's going to be a continuous effort. I think the most important thing is that we are learning, and people continue learning and continue being patient. As long as we are seeing that things are moving in the right direction, I think we will get there. So your other question was about whether we are seeing a balance between client value and the business case. I think naturally it has to happen. Because if we only drive the business case, no one will buy. And if we only drive client value, there will be no suppliers for these products. So we are beginning to see already that access to these products is improving. The premium rates are coming down. When I reflect on what our first products cost, I think it was somewhere on average of 15%. So it has come down from 15% 8 years ago to now an average of 5%. And the main thing is that we have to keep negotiating that the farmer is insuring more, that we are seeing volumes, because the insurance company and the reinsurers want to see that. I think one observation is that even if you pick 5 farmers who are accessing insurance right now, they're probably just insuring 10% of what their total exposure is. They're just trying it out. So what we are having is conversations with farmers about, you have 5 cows, why would you only insure one? How do you pick the one to insure? What could happen to the others? Yeah? So, we are trying to drive the conversation towards, even with the numbers we have, even with the farmers we have, can they insure more? Can they just ensure the expected output, not just seed? Because it looks like a big success, but most of them are just ensuring seed and fertilizer, which is just a third of their total exposure. So when these discussions then naturally bring the trade-off of getting the premium to be lower because the volumes are improving. It's becoming a better business case for the insurance company. The other thing in relation to the business case is recognizing the different partners involved in the value chain and making sure that there's something in it for them. So if you're working with cooperatives, with other aggregators, there will be an admin fee. There is a cost of aggregation. So it's finding what their business case is and how insurance actually adds value, why they need to add insurance to their service delivery. But we are seeing that happening now. We've had negotiations with veterinary officers about if they will reduce their cost of valuations for the cows, then we will add a commission that they will take away for every cow insured. So those conversations are happening. Your other question was about alternative distribution. So yes, Kilimo Salama was known for the work we were doing with the agro-input shops. In the third year, when we were phasing that out, we started trying out a different model. So we started trying the aggregator model, basically, where we went back now to the financial institutions and told them, I think we have proven our point. We think farmers over time understand what insurance is, that they are willing to pay their own money as well, that they're beginning, the products are paying out. So the financial institutions now started incorporating insurance into their program. So we have quite a number of banks and MFIs who are offering insurance through the credit that they are providing. The other distribution channels, we have mobile-linked products, we have seed-linked products. So there's a range of products that we are offering through different distribution channels. The main thing, the overarching thing in all of these distribution channels is that we piggyback on an existing infrastructure. We're not trying to develop infrastructure for delivery of insurance because farmers already say they want insurance with something else. So it's a lot easier to add insurance to existing transactions, to existing services that they are accessing. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think we'll now move on to...
Earlier on in my career, to work as a product manager for an agrochemical distribution company, Bayer Crop Science in Nairobi. And it was a very nice moment. But then when I was offered a job in an insurance company to drive agriculture insurance, I went back to my model farmer to sell insurance. And we had a very good conversation. And after some few sessions, he told me, you know what? All you insurance people are from the same mother. And it took another 2 years for me to convince him to buy insurance. And so after 2 years, he bought insurance. And then as issues could turn out, that year was a very bad year. It was a claim. We had a drought in Kenya, and also we had a severe disease outbreak in the wheat growing areas of Kenya. And so I went back to this farmer. Of course, he was very distraught, and he will understand now why he bought insurance. And we went through a claim process. And because there was nobody who did understand how to adjust agricultural claims, I went back to my university professor, who was a very respected person in Kenya, in Kenyan academic sphere, and asked the professor, I have an issue here. I want you to help me to adjust it in agricultural claim. And he said, okay, fine. What is it? And I told him it's insurance, and he said, no, I don't know anything about insurance. So I took him to the boardroom and closed the door and took him through the principles of insurance. It was like a reverse role, and say, okay, professor, I got you this time. I know something. And so after we left that 2-hour session on the principles of insurance, we went to the field to adjust the claim. And we paid, eventually, the claim, the way it was done was very good, and the reinsurer was in agreement. And the total claim payout was coming to 210,000 US dollars as the payable claim, which was huge by any Kenyan insurance standard. And my managing director called me at that time and asked me, Isaac, are you sure of what you've done here? Then I said yes. And he told me, before I sign, I want you to convince me that I'm doing the right thing. And we were the two of us in the room, in his boardroom, in the boardroom, in his office, sorry. And I was shaking. For the first time I was shaking because I know I'm exposing 210 million shillings of a company which is not very well known on agriculture insurance, and their board, I mean, there's finances behind it. And all of us are from the private sector. You understand that magnitude of claim, the kind of thing you have to go through. And so he said, eventually I'll approve it. So he approved the claim. And then I took that paper very fast and the discharge note and went back to the farmer, and he signed very quickly. And so after he signed, he was very happy. He came and thanked me. And then it was in that following season to buy insurance. And then I went to sell to him again insurance because he had expanded his farm and he did not buy insurance. And he told me, you know what, after we had, sometimes people don't tell you the truth in the office. After we had an outing for some time, he told me, you know what, I just feel lucky that insurance had to pay this 210 million. And he never bought insurance up to now. So I will go back to my presentation, right? So it offers a glimpse on what, how people perceive insurance out there. So at Swiss Re, we believe in innovation, and we are focused in making sure that this agriculture insurance business succeeds. And we have invested a lot of time and resources to make sure that farmers benefit. Our interest mainly is to make sure that this works, and also to support the industry to be able to realize the dreams and aspirations of everybody that is involved. At the center of it, we believe that the farmer is key, and he has to be given the support that is required. So shall we go to the next slide? So at Swiss Re, we try to engage with the industry in so many areas, and part of it is that because where I sit, I mainly look after microinsurance and public sector, public-private sector relationship. And we realized that for us to grow this business, we need to have a multi-sectoral approach. And also when you're looking at this, mainly we need to bring on board all the stakeholders that are involved. And so we look at this as something that we can all take it. When we look at microinsurance or agriculture insurance in general, of course, talking about agriculture insurance in Africa, most of it fits in microinsurance because we are talking about the smallholder farmers, and hardly will you find a large-scale farmer buying insurance because they have resources, they tend to know everything, and so in any case, it's not a message that they receive that easily. I mean, that was the first message that I realized, that it does not work all the time with the large-scale farmer, because I mean, they have got the resources to cushion their shocks, but the people who are mostly affected are the smallholder farmers, and that is why we take initiative to focus on what their needs are. But then in understanding this issue, we did segment in Africa exactly what are the segmentation we have as far as our clients are concerned on index insurance. First of all, we have got people in Africa who will never afford. I mean, all of us are fighting for a very small piece of insurance, market, I mean, which is around 100 million people in the whole of Africa. But then we have got another segment of around 400 million people who can afford insurance, and that is where most of the farmers will fall. But then also we have got another segment which is around to another 400 million people which can never afford insurance because they live below $2 per day. And so those are candidates for social protection programs, and that is when government comes in. So we're looking at macro level, we can look at our solution providing for this. We look at it macro level where we talk, we engage with governments and say, okay, we can propose maybe a drought hedge for a country. And then also we go to another level where we're saying, okay, fine, what else can we do? We can have government-sponsored programs, and I think in Nairobi or in Kenya, we have CLIP program, which is a very good an example for what I'm talking about. And we have had a lot of interest across Africa. I mean, it is coming out that countries like Ethiopia are doing very well, and I think tomorrow you'll hear a lot about what Oromia is doing. We're having discussions even in South Africa, Uganda. I mean, this discussion about countries or governments becoming more accountable or willing to do something to their peoples becoming much more practical and much more like a reality. And so we are supporting that as an initiative. And so we also have got the bottom pyramid, which this may essentially will be something that they cannot be able to buy insurance on their own. So when you're talking about agriculture insurance, there are people you will sell an index insurance policy to, you propose an index insurance policy to, and they will never buy because that is not their priority. So as the private sector, we have a challenge to efficiently reach out to this market and see what we can develop. And that is why we think that classifying these people becomes a very critical element for achieving scale if we have to grow this market. Next slide, please. So there are just various examples of index insurance programs that we have, starting from Ethiopia, Kenya. I mean, index insurance is not a new concept. We have a lot of progress in Kenya, and that you can see from here what we are doing at the moment. I mean, most of the time we talk about stories about India. Yeah, well, India is a good story about index insurance, but also as Kenya or Africa, we have got a responsibility to drive these new innovations. And so as we take charge of our own affairs to make sure that the solution we develop here can work here, because there is no copy paste. We, as Swiss Re, we have got opportunity or ability and resources to compare what, for example, happens in Mongolia and bring it to Nairobi or bring it to Kampala. But it doesn't work that way. We work with the, we see that solutions that have got potential to grow are homegrown all the time. And so if we want to grow this index insurance business in whatever country, the solution have to come from their own country. And we as Swiss Re or the other external players, including the donor community and the development community, then we can support those communities that are drawn, those solutions that are generated by the local industry. And so problems of agriculture insurance in Uganda can only be solved by Uganda. And so we can only do that, support them by bringing in the external expertise that often is lacking, and to help various parties work together. Next slide, please. So what are the challenges? And I've tried to look at the challenges to see exactly what you see. Of course, we have basis risk being one of the biggest challenges to index insurance. But then over time, we have had a lot of improvement in product development. There is scientific data that is coming up that is helping the improvement of index insurance. I recall when we started rolling out livestock insurance, the peak cell size we're talking about was 5 kilometers and 5 kilometers. But now we can comfortably talk about 100 by 100 meters. So it is an advancement in technology and the resources that are available that is will deal with issues like basis risk. Data availability is an issue, and we find it across data, both weather, yield data is still an issue. And this one, we see a very, a challenge, especially on people who are custodians of data, understanding why we need this data. I recall to having gone to a meteorological department in Nairobi with my colleague, my colleague who was not Kenyan, and she was able to get data as a foreigner from the Kenya Meteorological Department, and me as a native a Kenyan, I was given a bill, which was equivalent to around 5,000 US dollars. I needed for one single place to price a product, for one single station. So, but then I thank the authorities, because a lot has changed ever since. But then we still need to do more. So it needs a lot of stakeholders engagement. And the critical thing is custodians of data have to understand why insurance companies need this data. And they should not price it, because I mean, some pricing is just way too above what we can. We are in the initial stages of product development, and we need the support of all government arms. The other thing is the hidden cost. I mean, these are, as an insurer, you know, these things are there. But then we can continue by doing a lot of investment through the public sector partnership. In this case, what we have seen is that there is always a tendency of people to lump all their initial cost into the contract. And that inflates the contract and makes the product very expensive. We can overcome that if we look at this as a long-term investment, because it is not a quick win. I mean, agriculture insurance is the best thing that happens to the African farmer and any African country, because, I mean, 74% of African people depend on agriculture. And if you invest in agriculture, and agriculture insurance is basically a public good, just the same way we are talking about universal health care. And if we put the same focus we're putting in agriculture insurance, we have the opportunity to change people's life, because people will be more willing to invest more in farming. They will have sufficient food, and that will solve a lot of issues. The other thing that is very important is reliable and transparent. I mean, this touches on something to do with credibility of how do we access our claim process? How do we convince the client to buy again? Because we don't come up with new terms at claims adjustment. I think the straight, and that is what makes index insurance very good, because you know this is what you'll be paid when this happens. But then with all that kind of knowledge, we also need to be a bit, how do I put it? We need to be more pragmatic in the way we approach claims, especially agro claims. I was having a discussion this afternoon about a farmer who insured his crops, but then because the wildebeest missed their migration routes, he sold his crop of around a crop that was valued something to do with 10 million US dollars being destroyed by wildebeest in a matter of 2 hours. And so, but then he had bought insurance. But then going back to the same this person and telling him that, okay, fine, this was excluded, and leaving at that, really that discourages people. Because, I mean, we have got rules of res gratia, but then I think we also have to be considerate especially at introductory phase, because people buy insurance because the farmers we're talking to about index insurance have not heard about insurance, and what makes them to come and buy is when you convince they can see that actually this insurance pays. So I think as claim adjusters insurance, we need to be a bit considerate also. We need to come up with very simple index insurance products. My first index insurance contract, IBLI, it was rocket science. And when I went to the commissioner's office in Nairobi for regulatory approval, and I don't know who said that, but he told me, I've never seen this kind of contract, but if the regulator says, if Swiss Re says it's okay, it's okay. And that is how I got the first regulatory approval for index insurance. I think, and we see these things happening quite a lot, such that some dubious products that come on the market, the regulator, the people who are in charge of regulators don't take time to look at them. And so that has an effect, because when they malfunction, then the farmers lose trust in this kind of thing. But overall, I think the regulator's office in Kenya has done a very fantastic job. Then this is on index insurance. Right, so I mean, let's give it credit. I think we can only grow the business when we have good support from the regulator's office. And I recall when Rahab was pointing the story we had about distributing index insurance through distributors, agro distributors, right? The pragmatic approach of the regulator's office in Nairobi is what made us to roll out and even try this idea, right? Later on, we discovered that it's not an efficient way, it's an exciting way, and very many people want to talk about mobile phone application in selling contracts. But then, as you try to test them, you realize that they may not be the right thing. Maybe we have got another way, we are somewhere else where they become more effective. But then, because the regulator has given us authority to try out these things, we come up with very innovative solutions. I mean, things like M-Pesa were not developed because of regulatory constraint. I think because people are they want to try this new thing, and I like dealing with institutions that are very pragmatic in this case, and that really has given us ability as not praising Kenya so much, to be ahead in the insurance industry, because that has been a positive in this. I mean, when we talk about index insurance in Africa, many people refer to CLIP, and we could not afford that without the support from government as well as the regulator office. So with that, I think this was enough of my slide, right? Unless, was there anything? No, there is one more, sorry. Okay, good. There is this topic that how can government get involved in this? Financial resources. But then every time we hear about subsidies, it's like that is the only thing the government can do. I mean, there is more to government support beyond subsidies. So we see, like, for example, in the financial sector, of course, we're looking at issues to do with creating the enabling environment, creating the necessary laws. I mean, if it's issues to do with tax regime, I mean, that is government support. Of course, there is issues of education that goes a long way into making this, and I must commend the Ugandan government because they have done a fantastic job in awareness creation. And awareness creation is just one of the components. I mean, there is issues that the government can continue still supporting. And when I'm talking about government, I'm not only just saying the Ministry of Agriculture. The Ministry of Finance is also involved. All the stakeholders come together to make this a reality. So thank you very much for listening to me. And good.
So when you see the organizer of the conference coming to the front to the moderator, the negotiation is about time. So we've run out of time, and I'm going to trade in my slot of questions for Isaac to 3 questions from the audience, and you're free to ask Isaac, Rahab, or Sande. So can we have those 3 questions now? Okay, there's one hand there. Do we have the microphones? Okay, so there's one there, there's one here. Should I get the 3rd one? And one there. Okay.
Bonjour. Mettez vos casques parce que je vais parler en français. Je m'appelle Mohamed Ndao. Je suis un superviseur de la République du Sénégal, où nous avons, depuis quelques années, fait des pas assez importants dans le domaine de l'assurance agricole. Je n'ai pas de questions pour vous, parce qu'on m'a posé des questions auxquelles je n'ai pas pu répondre, et je suis sûr que vous ne pourrez pas répondre, et personne au monde ne peut répondre dans le domaine de l'assurance indicielle. c'est parce qu'en l'état actuel du développement de l'assurance indicielle, personne n'a ces réponses. Je veux parler des indices. Nos jeunes modélistes qui travaillent dans les universités, différentes universités africaines ou européennes ou américaines, sont en train de travailler peut-être sur des indices mixtes pour pouvoir avoir quelque chose de fondamental, c'est-à-dire la confiance dont on a parlé tout à l'heure. Je pourrais parler pendant plusieurs heures de l'assurance agricole, conventionnelle ou indicielle, mais tel n'est pas le sujet. Je voudrais partager avec l'auditoire quelques convictions très fortes sur le développement de l'assurance agricole. L'assurance agricole, le paysan, quelle que soit la couleur de sa peau, quel que soit son lieu de résidence, raisonne de la même manière. Et ça, c'est des visites de terrain qui m'ont permis. Mon ami Peter Red a peut-être été quelqu'un qui a participé au financement de beaucoup de voyages d'études que nous, Sénégalais, avons fait à travers le monde. Je veux citer l'Inde, etc. Mais ce n'est pas là l'objet. Donc le paysan, il ne peut pas avoir confiance en l'assureur traditionnel parce que ce qu'il avait vu auparavant dans l'assurance classique n'est pas identique. L'assurance agricole ne peut pas marcher sans les subventions. Dans la salle, je ne sais pas qui a un champ ici. On aurait pu inviter le président de l'association des agriculteurs d'Ouganda, s'il en existe un ou deux. Il vous aurait posé des questions très directes. Ces agriculteurs-là ont des préoccupations. Et ces préoccupations ne sont pas souvent prises en compte parce que nous nous réunissons entre intellectuels, nous parlons de problèmes d'assurance sans prendre totalement en compte toutes leurs préoccupations. Cet agriculteur-là a besoin, en ce qui concerne l'assurance indicielle, de participer à la confection de l'indice. Son risque de base, qui est l'autre problème important, et effectivement doit être conçu en même temps avec lui. Et je voudrais corriger une erreur qui est avancée souvent par les panélistes en disant que l'éducation est une question fondamentale dans le développement de l'assurance agricole. Ce n'est pas l'éducation, c'est la communication. Et c'est une nuance extrêmement importante. Ces gens ont besoin de participer pour comprendre. Mais ce n'est pas parce qu'ils participent pour comprendre que c'est vous qui leur enseignez. Non, c'est un échange. C'est pourquoi c'est une communication. Ce n'est pas de l'éducation. Autre certitude que je voudrais partager en tout cas avec vous, si le temps, parce que je sais que le temps est imparti, je vais terminer avec peut-être avec cette dernière question-là. C'est sur le rôle du régulateur. Moi, je suis un régulateur depuis presque 25 ans. Depuis 2011, je ne m'occupe que de régulation en matière d'assurance agricole. Donc, c'est vraiment un mouvement que nous accompagnons dans ces différentes phases. Mais ce que les réassureurs doivent comprendre, c'est que, compte tenu du fait que nous n'avons pas encore les moyens au niveau local de créer ces indices-là pour aller à l'échelle, parce qu'aller à l'échelle exige effectivement que l'assurance indicielle soit promue, soit poursuivie. Il faut nécessairement que nous prenions le temps de ne pas accepter qu'effectivement ces indices-là soient préfabriqués par les réassureurs pour venir nous les proposer au niveau des autorités de régulation. Et je voudrais à ce niveau-là inviter nos amis, parce que je suis le représentant également de l'African Risk Capacity pour le Sénégal, pour dire qu'avec mon ami Makové et le Kenya, que nous sommes vraiment désolés de la situation qui est arrivée avec la sortie du Kenya de ce paramètre, de ce parapluie au niveau macro, avec le sinistre, la sécheresse qu'on a connue en 2016, où effectivement on aurait payé au minimum 50 millions de dollars en tenant compte des deux polices que vous avez de 30 millions de dollars et en enlevant la prise en compte, la partie qui vous est réservée. Et véritablement, je pense qu'il faut avoir cette approche holistique, l'African Risk Capacity, pour effectivement régler les problèmes au niveau macro, au niveau méso, avoir des compagnies d'assurance avec des banques agricoles, des réassurances agricoles locales pour développer ce niveau méso et au niveau micro, développer cette assurance-là. Voilà un peu les certitudes que je voulais partager avec vous. En tout cas, pas des certitudes, mais des points de vue que je voulais partager pour dire qu'il faut avoir de l'espoir. Ce n'est pas parce qu'il y a des difficultés que nous devons perdre espoir sur le développement de l'assurance agricole. Ça va se développer, Inch'Allah. Merci.
I might have to apologize. We have run out of time, and that was lengthy. But okay, let me have the other two, and then we can end on that note. But I think those were more like insights on adding to how to address these challenges. And I'll just urge the other two that I pointed at to be quite brief, so that at least we have time to get the final remarks from the panelists. Thank you. So I think there was a hand here and a hand there.
Thank you, Chair, for the chance to make a contribution to the presentation made. I had two issues to share. One relates to the essence of agricultural insurance. From all presenters, it appears that the issue, the essence of agricultural insurance, to the large extent, it's about food security. I had a meeting with the Tanzania Chamber of Commerce and Agriculture the other day, and they're saying if the issue of insurance, agricultural insurance, is about food security, it is not the insurance which will help. And I want to reason with you together here to see what will be. They're saying the issue will be water. If you give us water, we will have good agriculture, we'll have return from the agriculture. So I'm thinking from insurance perspective, how would you bundle that? Because right now in the index insurance, you are talking about insuring the weather problem. If there is a problem in the weather, which will cause shortage in the yield of the whatever farmer, then you repay, you compensate. But if you provide water, there will be no problem of yield. So I don't know how we can work out as insurers. Two, the examples of any profitable schemes so far would have make this discussion fruitful. Is there any examples of profitable schemes and to what extent that profit has been achieved in which countries? Because asking resources from the government in Africa is a high toll kind of a job. So I will suggest to discuss if there is any profitable schemes from the panel. And the last thing, two last things, Chair, if you may allow. I wanted a clarification from our Kilimo Kwanza initiative. The premium levels so far. What are the premium levels of the initiative? And out of 3.5 million farmers, how many get some paid? out of that. And the last thing is, I would want to engage in the research on what is the amount government spends on the disaster management in Africa in aggregate, because the government will not say we don't spend on disaster during the drought, because it's a political milestone, so to speak. So if you have a data, then we can have an argument in favor of such an initiative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have one there. Is your question covered? Or should I? It's way too big. Okay. I could take one more question then. Okay, right at the back there.
Well, thank you. My name is Alex Bekunda, and I represent Masiko here. And I was wondering, to what extent is the private, and this question goes to the Ugandan counterparts, to what extent is the private sector, the insurance private sector in Uganda, willing to actually take on the risk and invest in places such as Karamoja? I mean, I know this weather index insurance has been going on for the last 3 years, and I was quite disappointed when I actually met some of the insurance companies, and all of them actually were unwilling to take on the risk, and it's kind of, so I just want to understand from them what would be their position on that.
Okay. Thank you. All right. On that note, I'll ask the panelists to respond to the comments and the questions. You're free to take on any of the questions. I'll start from Isaac, and then I'll end with Sunday.
I think I will take agree with the comments made by Momat now, that the issue is not about education, but also the way we package our information. Because, I mean, insurance premium as a term is a very foreign term in our languages across Africa. So how do you explain to an ordinary person that I need you to pay premium to protect you? But then when you put it differently, for example, like in the case of livestock, you are using one goat to protect 10 goats. That is a message that becomes more relevant to the people as opposed to talking about insurance. So, I mean, that is something that I do agree. On the other hand, I also believe that for us to make progress in this country, in this sector, there is a lot of investment that needs to go into it. It is not going to be a quick win. There is, for sure, you can make money out of agriculture insurance, and is the insurer talking right? So we know Africa is a very well endowed place in terms of climate risk compared to other areas. I mean, our main risk here is drought only. But then it will surprise you that from a global point of view, drought is not a major issue. So if we can be able to navigate through how to deal with our drought situations in Africa, then we are in a better position to provide food security for our people. I do agree with also our brother from Tanzania that we are not going to sell insurance just as insurance alone. We have to demonstrate value to the people that we are selling to. What is this insurance thing? There's a lot of skepticism, and most of us, even those who have gone to school and even work in the insurance industry, don't appreciate insurance. I will take 1 minute to give you a feedback I received from my friend CEO about a discussion I had with him about his child's performance in class. And he said, so we were talking about which school is he taking his son to. And he told me, my son is not doing very well in class, so I think he should just be an insurance person. And this, of course, I mean, this is a CEO of an insurance company, and so we have to change that attitude. I mean, if you're coming from the Western world, you appreciate the value of insurance. So there is a sad situation even in the career in the well-educated community in Africa. So we have to remain steadfast and appreciate the value of insurance. So, and agriculture insurance being not a compulsory class of insurance, you can imagine the amount of resources that needs to go into it and the amount of awareness creation that needs to go into it. Thank you.
So I'll tackle your first question from Tanzania about water management and the interplay between irrigation versus insurance. So you're right, insurance will not make any crops grow. I think the case for insurance is with other risk reduction mechanisms being incorporated, such as irrigation and proper seed varieties, planting at the right time, weeding, taking care of the crop. Then if you add insurance to that, you have a more resilient farmer. You have, out of 5 years, the possibility of having 4 years of a good harvest. And then the fifth possibly is where insurance would come in to help the, cushion an extremely bad season. So insurance needs to be taken in combination with other measures. And farmers are right when they say they don't want insurance alone. They want insurance together with other value-added services. So water management would be a good idea to combine with insurance. Your other question was about humanitarian aid. What is the cost of humanitarian aid? So we had a look at data from the Kenya Red Cross, data from it was actually 1970 something, or much earlier than that. And what we were seeing, the main areas where they are spending money every other year is, number 1 was drought and famine, number 2 was flood, number 3 was malaria, cholera, and then population movement. So these are the kind of areas where a lot of appeals are being made every other year. And the data seems quite representative if you look at the rest of Africa as well. So have a look at their website, and there's quite a bit of data there. But it shows that some of these risks are actually insurable. With insurance combined with humanitarian aid, I think maybe the cost of financing disaster would be much more palatable. Your other question was, what is the premium rate for our programs? So I mentioned that at the beginning when we started, 8 years ago, it was on average 15%, but this has come down to an average of 5% now. So I say average because it depends on the crop, it depends on the location, it depends on which season the farmer is looking for insurance. It also depends on the volumes you're talking about for one product or one aggregator. But on average, it's at 5% now. Yeah.
Thank you. I will. There was a question which was directed to me, and another comment from the first person. I don't entirely agree that consumer education is irrelevant in this, because I think we are using different terminologies to mean almost the same thing. The farmer must appreciate the underlying principles of index insurance. And maybe the addition is, how would we package the information that we educate the farmer on? So it all comes to education, but using effective communication strategies. So it's not irrelevant, it is very relevant. But how would we deliver this message as we educate the farmer is perhaps my brother was trying to emphasize. To what extent can we get the farmer in Karamoja by insurance? I think there are two fears, and the discussions seem to have addressed those fears. One of the fear is perhaps the distance, which touches the aspect of distribution. And you remember, I and my colleagues have talked of regulatory flexibility to ensure cost-effective distribution. If that is addressed, then there is no reason why a farmer in Karamoja should not buy agricultural insurance. The other aspect, maybe for the benefit of the people in this house, Karamoja is one of the districts that has for long been associated with backwardness in Uganda. And it comes to education. The Karamojong needs to get the information in the right package. And the risk is eminent in Karamoja, the agricultural risk. So they would actually demand insurance more than any other person, perhaps, in Uganda. If we address the question of how we get there, we address the question of them understanding how it works, how it operates, and perhaps the issue of the cost. And maybe lastly, again, in respect to that, I had talked of the 30% and the 50%. For the higher risk areas, such as Karamoja, the premium subsidy has been allowed even to go up to 80%, meaning that the ultimate cost that they will have to pay for the insurance will be relatively cheaper than the other people who are located in other districts. So we are hopeful if we can address the challenges that are outstanding at the moment. Thank you.
So let me end on the note that I think Sunday actually began with, that this is a complex issue, but we've seen both private sector-led initiatives as well as a combination of private sector and government. And there are a number of success stories we've seen in Asia. I mean, most people talk about India as one of those examples where the government is actually pushing forward this. So I think it's possible. And with complex issues, you always have to find a way of actually navigating until you get success. I think at the beginning also the opening speech talked about opportunities for innovation, technology applications, and so on. So let me just end on the note that if you have a question or you still have an issue that hasn't been conclusively discussed, we have an opportunity in the next 2 days to address that, even in the next session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lemmy, and a big thank you to the panel. It's been a very fruitful and interesting discussion. It's generated a lot of questions and a lot of thoughts. Unfortunately, because of all the energetic discussions, we're going to have a shorter coffee break. So please, 15 minutes. So we have to be back here at 16:50. So what I recommend you do is get your coffee and your snacks and then bring them with you back to the conference venue, and you can have your tea here. So we'll see you back here at 16:50. Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you.
So we're going to run a session now where you will get a chance to give some comments on these issues yourselves from your own experience. And I would like to invite Peter Reeder to explain the Fishbowl concept and to facilitate the session. Thanks.
Thanks, Janice. Who's been in a fishbowl already? En français, je pense que c'est bocal à poisson rouge. Quelqu'un a été déjà dans un bocal à poisson rouge? Anybody in the fishbowl? Okay, sorry. I'll explain later.
Sorry, I forgot to say that we are arranging buses back to the hotels tonight and for tomorrow morning. So we will be sending the sheet around with a space to write the name of your hotel next to your name. So please put the hotel's name down so that we can make sure we can pick you up and drop you off. Thanks. Sorry, Peter.
That's fine. Okay, I'll tell you what the fishbowl is about then. It's a metaphor, obviously, and it's a different format for discussing topics like agriculture index insurance. The idea behind it is that there's not just one expert standing here and talking to you and you're just listening. All of you are experts. We got a taste of that in the questions and answers session. Not just questions were raised, but also you contributed your expertise. And this fact that everybody is an expert on something is reflected in the fishbowl format. It's a way to get all of your insights represented more meaningfully than when I'm just standing here and talking, or Janice or somebody else. So that's the good news. It's exciting, it's interesting, it's new, it's fun. The not so good news is this is the worst possible setting. It's called fishbowl originally because it's circles of chairs. So there's some people sitting in the inner circle and some people sitting in the outer circle. The people in the inner circle do the talking, and the people in the outer circle can move into the inner circle when they want to contribute something. So the entire setting is designed to facilitate people moving from the audience to the speaking role and back to the audience role and break down the barriers between experts and speakers and the audience listeners and just purely receptive. That won't work so well here because we couldn't arrange seats in a circle, but we're going to try anyway. And the main message here is this only works if you participate. So there's going to be different people sitting there. It's going to be you, somebody from you, not too long, not too short. It's not for the introverted. Les Français comprennent aussi. Ouais? Il y a traduction? Okay. So this will work if some of you accept the invitation to share their expertise. You can ask questions. It's a bit like the Q&A session we had before, but you have a more extended opportunity to address the audience. Be it with questions, be it with your own experience, your own suggestions, your own speculations, or your wishes, what you think should or might come about. You can be speculative. You can discuss as well among each other, like in a Davos-style panel. So it's exciting. So far, I know there's one volunteer to start this off with. That's Teos, right? You haven't regretted your boldness? Please. And usually it's okay for there to be empty chairs. Miguel, you have been through the fishbowl format a couple of times, huh? Yeah, I learned this at the ILO. Okay, so that's the preparation. As I said, it's normal to have empty chairs there because people are encouraged to come up and go down. The first question we would like to discuss in this first round, we're going to have a couple of different rounds, thank you, is what characteristics of agriculture index insurance in particular give rise to concerns around client value, sustainability, and scale. It's after all the same topic we're discussing throughout, the balance between client value, between scale, between sustainability. And that's something you have to address in every sort of insurance and probably every sort of product or service you sell. But what's particular about agriculture index insurance in that respect? That's the first question, and the other ones will come later. So there's still a chair if anybody feels encouraged right away to jump up. Thank you. Thank you very much. So since Theos was the first to volunteer, I'd be happy to give him the word first. Does this, you approached me in the break and said you wanted to add something. Is this in line with the first question that I've put up there?
I think absolutely, yes. Thank you, Peter. My name is Teus Maurik. I'm an actuary working at the Insurance Regulatory Authority of Uganda. And as an actuary, I'm currently involved in the approval process for a number of index-linked insurance products that have been submitted by the consortium of insurance companies in Uganda that want to enter this market. And as being an employee of the IRA of Uganda, there are basically two key regulatory concerns that I have following the documentation that I've seen from the products that were submitted to the IRA for approval. But however, please note, I'm very much, I'm a big supporter of index-linked insurance. I just want to raise this to create awareness of it and maybe also to discuss how can we prevent, how can we address these issues. So the first thing is about the definition of insurance. Maybe you are aware that index-linked insurance is considered a type of gambling for some people just because of the phenomenon of basis risk. I can explain that a little bit. The typical requirement for insurance is that the payouts provide indemnity, so to the individual policyholders. So the payout should be linked one-to-one to the size of the damage that he is suffering from the occurrence of the insured event, let's say a drought. Of course, this is just exactly the benefit of index-linked insurance, that for cost reasons, we are not going to check, or the insurers are not going to check the damage, the losses of the individual farmers. I can understand that. We talked about basis risk. Of course, and you can define it maybe as a difference, the deviation between the policy, the payout that is received from such a policy in case the event occurs, and the actual loss of the farmer. This deviation can be both positive and negative. We generally only focus on the situation that is positive. So the payout it's negative. The damage is higher, the loss is higher than the payout. So that will result in policyholders being unsatisfied. It may even be very bad for their trust in insurance companies, etc. So that's obvious that this risk, this type of deviations must be minimized as good as possible. This is also, of course, particularly relevant for regulators, because we are supposed to protect the interests of the policyholders. But the deviation, I just want to mention the possibility of a positive, the possibility of a positive deviation. So the payout is higher than the actual loss. I think this may have been the case with the example that Mr. Isaac told about this policyholder who received a huge amount and never bought insurance since. I was wondering, is this guy, this person, this farmer, is he actually still a farmer? Maybe he retired. I mean, is this, what's the risk of this? Because if that would be the case, then basically this policyholder may have found out that this type of insurance is basically a type of gambling. And other people may also start, other farmers may also start thinking about it. And of course, from an insurer's perspective, this may not be very serious problem as long as the pricing is correct. They pay for it. However, from a regulator, we are not supposed to supervise or regulate gambling or casinos, things like that. So I would like to raise this on how can we prevent that these products can be considered gambling, as gambling. The second issue, which is maybe closely related to this, is the supposed role of aggregators, so-called aggregators. Aggregators are very, the role of aggregators is beneficial for insurers because they act as the policy holder. So all communication can go through the aggregator. The insurance company does not have to communicate with the individual farmer. The aggregator may also collect premiums, but most importantly maybe, he may be responsible for distributing the payout from the insurer in case the event has occurred to the individual farmers that he represents in the area. Now the question for me is, these policy holders are actually not true policy holders. Legally maybe they are, but they're basically only representatives of the true policy holders. I was wondering who is going to regulate the aggregators. Because there is, I think, a serious opportunity for fraud in this area. I mean, I'm not accusing those aggregators, but I mean, the way they have to distribute the total payout, of course, from a regulatory perspective, has to be fair. So how is this guaranteed? I know from one of the products that have been submitted for approval that the insurance company actually requires the aggregator to do the best they can to improve the yields of the individual farmers. So they have to inform them. I don't know exactly what they can do, but they have to do the best they can. That's what they are required to do, required by the insurance company. That makes sense. Makes sense. It's similar to saying when you buy fire insurance, you have to be careful that you need to have a fire alarms, etc., just to limit the risk. Still, I mean, these aggregators, when they are supporting the individual farmers in the area, are they doing this in a fair way, fair for each individual farmer in the area? I'm just wondering, who is going to, in general, who is going to regulate the aggregators? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teush. I have a role of a moderator here, so that gives me the privilege to quickly comment on something you said very quickly before I pass the word on to you. So I was at a conference for InsurTech last year, and I met a company who's proposing index earthquake insurance in California. And I asked them, well, how do you go about the insurable interest? First they didn't understand. They said, well, but if a supervisor asks if the clients have had any damage, they say, oh, well, that's easy. You just say you had some psychological trauma. That's all we need to hear. So all you have to do is say, yes, I feel some bad after the earthquake, and that's all we need to know to pay the thing. I felt that a very flexible, innovative, unconventional approach to insurable interest. I'm not proposing it here, but at least that's what serious-minded startups who are trying to attract hundreds of millions of investor money are going about doing in a place like the United States. Your comment about the lottery reminded me of my grandmother. The only person in my family who bought lottery tickets regularly, you know, this German lotto thing which has a draw every week, that was my grandmother. And one reason she kept doing it for all of her life is because she always had the same numbers. And she said, if I stop now and these numbers are drawn next week, I'm going to kill myself. I'm going to be furious. So that reminds me, perhaps it's not so bad to get this mindset into the heads of the insurance customers. What if a farmer, the farmer that Isaac mentioned, has a terrible loss next year or the year after? Wouldn't he be mad at not having renewed the insurance? Could we transfer this compulsion of my grandmother somehow to insurance customers? You've been buying it for a couple of years now. It's true, you haven't had a payout, but what if next year is a terrible drought? Think of that. Maybe we're going to get back to lotteries later. I think there's a lot to be said about that, or derivatives, or whatever you want to call it. But let me now pass the word on to you. Would you say your name and where you work?
Thank you very much. My name is Munya. I actually work for the Agriculture Insurance Consortium in Uganda. I'm here to share a bit of actual experience. Because I think most times we do share sort of theoretical things. Then we've been on the ground with actual experiences of how the farmers are actually reacting to the products that we are putting on the ground, and what we think needs to be done, and what we have done that has worked, and what has not worked. So I think that was one of the reasons that I wanted to share. And one of the main things was to say, I don't think we're at a level of scaling up yet, because we still have a big problem of awareness, sensitization, education. I think people have said it. I've been all over the country. I was in the West just recently, and people don't know that the products are there. And if they don't know, they will not take up the product. And if they don't know, you can't even explain to them what is going on. So I think where we are, especially in this country and in many other countries that I think I've shared experiences with, is still that. There's still a much more to be done in terms of just awareness. And as soon as they are aware and you sensitize them and you tell them what it is, they sign on. It's wrong when people say that the farmers don't want to take insurance. This is from experience. They actually are taking insurance. Like I said, I was in the West. After a presentation, 100 farmers who were there came up and signed up immediately, because we're talking in their language. There was someone speaking in their language, explaining exactly, because they've had drought. The last 8 months, they've had drought. There's the armyworm that has just come in, and so they understand that things are happening. So I would like to sort of take away that myth that they don't want to take insurance. They actually want it, but they didn't know that it's actually there, and there's something like that. And I do agree in terms of when we come to basis risks, but I think also there are many steps that have been taken to try and address that basis risk, especially in the product design aspects of the products. We'll be coming to you with our changes that we're trying to do to reduce the basis risk. But I think it's something that also we are well aware of. I think those are things that I really wanted to share with you.
Thank you so much. For those who have missed the beginning, I just repeat that you're all invited to come up here in front. Just walk up, I'll get you a free seat, trust me. Oh yeah, there's one comment I wanted to make in response to yours. Yes, and feel free to walk down if you want to, at any point. So in response to your comment, I talked to the insurance supervisor in the Dominican Republic 2 weeks ago. Actually, I did an index insurance supervisory training. And one thing we discussed a bit is the fact that index insurance, as it is targeted to small-scale farmers, is also always microinsurance, pretty much always. So this awareness thing, is this an issue of agriculture insurance, of index insurance, or of microinsurance? I don't know much about Uganda. I haven't been here for ages, but there's some countries like Zambia or the Philippines or Sri Lanka. I just learned that as of now, every September is going to be insurance month in Sri Lanka. I don't think they're going to talk an awful lot about index insurance, but they're going to talk about insurance. So just keeping that in mind and getting index insurance onto the bandwagon of insurance or financial inclusion. More and more countries are doing financial inclusion strategies with support from the World Bank or others. So let's remember to include it there. If we're just trying to get large-scale campaigns for awareness or education or whatever we want to call it for agriculture index insurance, that's not going to work. But if we can include that into a larger campaign of financial literacy, of insurance awareness, and ideally, let me just finish with my dream, we're going to teach children about insurance, the fundamental things. Why don't you get the premium back? What's the difference between savings and insurance? Why is it the duty of the insurance companies to police fraud? If every 15-year-old Ugandan and Mozambican and Bolivian knows that, I think we're going to be a big step ahead, and that's one thing we're pushing for. But let me stop here and pass the word on to my old colleague, Miguel Solana.
Hello, I'm Miguel Solana from the Impact Insurance Facility of the ILO. And actually, when thinking about value, actually one thing came to my head, which is when I started working on this around 10 years ago, I remember we were in Peru and we were working with farmers. And we were trying to explain farmers a little bit in very simple language, whether they wanted a fair or more expensive product that would be regularly adjusted product, or a cheaper but maybe not so fair product, which would be index insurance. And actually, I think this was quite an interesting conversation because it forced us to try to start thinking about how to define fairness among different insurance products, and how to define what is expensive and what is cheaper, and what is the value that they get out of each of these two products. And this was our exercise. And actually, what we heard from farmers is that they preferred fair but more expensive, because they believe that they don't want to run this, what we call basis risk, but for them it's like, I don't want to bet on something happening to me and not getting anything out of the product, because this is exactly why I'm buying insurance. And this showed us a lot about the perception of the importance in index insurance and getting the value right. Because if you didn't get the value right, you would somehow fail on the promise of insurance. Because pretty much the farmers understood quite well the product, and there was this one thing which was around like, what is it that we're promising to farmers at getting out of it? And actually, when I hear some of the conversations here, I think actually we're overselling the promise of index insurance, and we're selling this as the one option that will sort out all the risk problems that they're facing. And I think we need to be able to measure that. This is the value and our promise, and actually our promise is being only one part of a full set of problems that they have. And actually I found it extremely interesting when we were hearing yesterday that, for example, farmers, despite being insured and having a paid out, they actually stopped producing one season because actually they were paying for school fees and food maybe and other sort of expenses. And we are still believing from our side that our promise is going to be the one that is, and we're selling them the fact that they will be able to be on their feet and everything. So I think we need to start thinking about what is the value, what are we communicating. I agree with the fact that the communication is important. I mean, I started my career, I'm an actuary, but I started my career on a trading floor, and I was dealing with options, meaning financial derivatives. And when I came into the insurance, back into the insurance world, and they were explaining me index insurance, it was actually an option. And if I start talking to you about options, put call options with strike prices, and it's executed and stuff, and Black-Scholes models to price the options and so on and so forth, I'm pretty sure we would be out of our talking exactly about the same thing, because a financial and a derivative option and an index insurance is exactly the same thing, but we're using extremely different things. I think it's exactly the same thing, and we were already mentioning that. I mean, we need to figure out how to get rid of words like triggers and parameters and things like that, because people are not thinking in those terms. And we need to start simplifying that. And I think this is what I wanted to share, that we need to simplify our language, and talking about options would be extremely confusing for people here, and it's exactly the same thing for farmers out there if we're using the same languages, the same language that we want to use to define these things in our context.
Thanks a lot, Miguel. Actually, my experience, this question whether it's insurance or an option is something that many supervisors worry about. Now, why would that matter at all? Just to remind you that, in my opinion, the number one reason why it matters is that insurance products are supervised by insurance supervisors, and that usually comes with a fair amount of protection of the consumer. A lot of insurance supervision is to make sure that the customers get a fair deal, and the more vulnerable they are and the more risky the offer is, the more we all agree they need to be protected. And that's something totally different if you buy options or hedges or other financial products. That is one thing. On the other hand, earlier this afternoon, I was wondering, what if we start pitching index insurance as insurance at all? Somebody mentioned, I think it was Aker, that their customers didn't want to deal with insurance agents. They didn't trust insurance agents. We've come across people elsewhere who don't trust insurance at all. Now, that's something we try to work on with insurance supervision and consumer protection and regulation and all sorts of education or awareness campaigns, lots of things. But if people have a bad perception of insurance or don't understand insurance, is there something else that they know, Harambe maybe in Kenya, or some other concept which we can use to help them understand index insurance? Do we need to talk about insurance at all? I would like it to be supervised by insurance supervisors, don't get me wrong. I'd like it to be formalized and just as well regulated and supervised as automobile insurance or something else. But when we go out into the field and try to explain it to the farmer, maybe their local language doesn't even have a word for premium or for insurance or for trigger or for exit or all these sort of things. Can we come up with different language? We'd still have to say insurance in policy terms and conditions, but maybe not in the very first encounter we have with them. But let me stop there. And again, the invitation, I hope that by now there's things that you are interested in, you would like to say or share. I see a first hand there. Remember, you'll have to come up here to share with us, please. Yeah, whoever wants to stay or get down, if you all want, it's okay. If some of you want to stay. Okay.
There's one thing I want to add on this. I remember reading in one of the draft policy terms that the policyholder was not supposed to submit claims, submit complaints about the level of the payout that he has received. He had to sign for this up front. Now we know there's a lack of trust in Africa towards insurers, and one of the ways regulators try to fight that is to establish complaints offices even within our own regulator here in Uganda that will allow policyholders to address their complaints, and these will be handled individually. So obviously for this type of insurance that will be simple for regulators because they are not allowed to receive any complaints. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing, to be honest. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Wale from Africa. You know, I have a little problem with this kind of payouts because essentially the payout depends on the weather. And the weather over the years, and that's on the weather over the years, as you know, you have to work on climate change over the years. And so historical data will not necessarily agree with present data. Even in Lagos, where I live, the rainy season does not occur, and this occurred many years ago. The low atmosphere, which talks about the weather. We have, you know, the modeling that's actually among us is essentially based on mathematical modeling. But the physics of the low atmosphere itself is not well known. And so when you add that with the climate change problem, you find out that the results are going to get at the end of the day may not agree, or most of them do not agree with reality. So I was thinking, regulators also get it right over the years, the gap between the deviation between the actual figures and the one that the trigger gives you. We monitor it over the few years, and then try to see where you could refine the model so that the trigger points are very close to the actual. Because there's a problem of climate change. It's there. There's the problem of the physics of the atmosphere not being well understood. And then we have put all the trust, all the hope on the trigger points that the most likely, especially considering the fact that in Africa here, data is not very, very current, and of very good quality. So it's as if we are not careful, the deviation is going to be always wider than the actual. And when you go like that, some people will gain from it, and some will lose from it, and that is not the essence of insurance.
I think you did. Thank you very much. It reminds me of machine learning, of course. So far we've had, as you say, a lot of trouble and spent a lot of money just in establishing the statistical models, how precipitation or wind speed correlates with plant growth or livestock mortality, and how we can detrend that for changing agricultural practices or climate change or other things. So I'm convinced that sooner or later somebody will throw machine learning at that, which is, as I understand it, a technique to get meaning out of large amounts of unstructured data, stuff that we don't even know is worth looking at. I don't know, migratory patterns of birds or cell phone records or God knows what sort of stuff that may give us some indication, and some machine, just by testing every possible combination, may come up with things that will allow us to have this convergence that you mentioned between the index and the real experience faster and more reliable. I think this is a good segue to move to the next level and expand this question to other stakeholders. So how can other stakeholders, we saw this large orchestra in agriculture index insurance, how can they come in and contribute to solve this complex issue of scale, client value, and sustainability? Is that something that's in line with your comments as well? Feel free to stay on the previous level. I don't want to push you, but just to let you and the audience know that that was the next level of question that we intended to discuss.
My comment would be in French. I think that je pense que il y a une synthèse importante qui a été faite au cours des différentes discussions sur ce que c'est que l'inclusion financière. Le premier élément, à mon avis, c'est la confiance, le trust. Le second élément, c'est l'availability. Est-ce que les produits sont disponibles? Un autre élément, c'est affordable. Est-ce que les produits ont un coût raisonnable notamment pour les assurés. Mais je souhaite en fait que ces éléments-là, ces différents éléments, ces 4 éléments qu'on a pu passer en revue, ne soient pas examinés seulement au niveau des assurés. Par exemple, quand on parle de la confiance, the trust, est-ce que les assureurs eux-mêmes se posent la question de savoir est-ce qu'ils ont confiance en fait dans le modèle? Est-ce que par exemple ils pensent que l'index insurance peut être un modèle profitable? Ça c'est une question que je me pose. Donc je souhaiterais que l'analyse qui consiste à dire, ok, sur les 4 éléments, les 4 grands critères, qu'est-ce qui est fait envers les assurés et bénéficiaires de contrats. Donc on se pose la même question sur les 4 éléments, qu'est-ce qui est fait au niveau des assureurs, éventuellement sur les 4 éléments, qu'est-ce qui est fait également au niveau des régulateurs, ainsi de suite, donc de toutes les parties prenantes. Si on prend par exemple la question de est-ce que le produit est disponible? Mais au niveau de l'assureur, si on examine la question au niveau de l'assureur, est-ce que le produit est disponible? L'élément fondamental, c'est est-ce que les données sont disponibles? Donc, c'est la disponibilité des données, la disponibilité de la technicité pour modéliser en fait le phénomène qui va permettre par la suite de rendre disponible en fait le produit de concevoir le produit et de le rendre disponible en fait pour l'assureur. Et également pour les problématiques d'éducation, nous on a mis en place en fait une réglementation sur l'index assurance en coopération notamment avec la Banque mondiale. Mais ce qu'on constate de façon pratique, c'est qu'il y a un effort d'éducation que nous, en tant que régulateurs, on doit faire à l'endroit des assureurs pour qu'ils comprennent comment ça fonctionne, avant également que l'assureur fasse cet effort d'éducation éventuellement. L'assureur et également le régulateur fassent cet effort d'éducation envers les assurés. Donc, c'est des thématiques qui sont importantes, les quatre grands points dans le cadre de l'inclusion financière, mais il faut avoir en fait un angle d'analyse de ces 4 thématiques au niveau de chacune des parties prenantes pour que globalement en fait on n'ait pas la photo sous un seul angle, mais qu'on ait tous les angles de la problématique pour traiter correctement en fait la problématique.
Merci beaucoup. If you allow me to respond in English, I think it's an excellent point, and one thing that I should have emphasized more when I showed the picture of the orchestra. The reason it's so important to talk about the many players in the value chain is that all of them have to understand something. And insurance, understanding insurance is not very easy. Understanding borrowing is easy. Everybody does that informally among brothers and sisters. So there's no human being on the planet older than 10 years, I think, who doesn't understand the concept of borrowing and lending. But there's a lot fewer people who understand insurance in any sort. And then move that to index insurance with all its problematics of basis risk and climate change becomes very, very difficult. It's not just the clients who have to understand a bit of it, and the distributors, and the supervisors, and the insurers and reinsurers, and it's also people at the Ministry of Agriculture. If there's any macro level engagement or meso level engagement, it's people at the press who have to understand when somebody complains or when something is launched with a great fanfare. And that's important because behind all that, as you point out, is a reputation risk. So I've come to believe that despite our best efforts with World Bank and donor funds in some countries, we haven't managed to convince insurance companies, for example, in the Dominican Republic, to engage in index insurance because the reputation risk they see is considerable. It takes insurance companies a lot of effort to look good. We know that the reputation of insurance in general is not so very good, not like banking or like telecommunications or Apple. So it takes them a lot of effort to just look good. And to threaten that by one case of basis risk, even if it's just 10 farmers who get a lot of noise in the press, that's a risky, risky choice. Thanks for that. Jonathan.
Thank you, Peter. So these comments I make in the capacity as in my day job as Insurance Commissioner in South Africa. So so interestingly, South Africa is at the fairly early stages of considering subsidized agricultural insurance scheme. So in that sense, we're certainly not a pioneer or anything like that in insurance. We're probably still catching up, and in particular, government is giving consideration to an index insurance scheme. And but I have to say, there is a lot of interest and excitement about the concept in terms of inclusive insurance, but I think Fangman touched on it, and others before me have, where I think the big policy questions, regulatory questions are around the issue of value to customers, and as Turs touched on, it certainly seems to be something that can't be introduced in a sort of half-hearted or half-baked way. So certainly, if the less granular the index and the information, the more it does become seemingly more like gambling in terms of the discrepancy between the payout and the loss actually suffered. So we would feel more comfortable that it starts to approach insurance the more granular the index becomes, the smaller the gap between the payout and the loss. But obviously that requires going into it with something that is already fairly developed, and I think it's that almost that pass through the start gate problem of how do you go in with a system that is quite sophisticated, because as we know, and this is the case also in South Africa, that we would be dealing with individuals, with farmers who may be having an interaction or an experience with insurance for the very first time. And back to the point around confidence and trust, I think if the first experience of insurance is a particularly bad one, then you have lost probably a generation or two of people who have trust in insurance. So that is a big challenge. I heard some comments earlier around, well, maybe you try and address that by having bundled products that combine it with some cover that is underwritten, but wasn't entirely sure how that's done whilst recognizing the sort of underlying problem of not having the loss adjusters or the loss assessors to be able to go out and do those individual claims assessments or underwriting. So maybe there's more information on that. And then the last point I wanted to make again was a little bit in response to Tours, because he picked up on this point around customer value and fair outcomes for policyholders, where there is let's call it an outsourced relationship with the use of aggregators. And I don't think that's an agricultural index insurance specific problem. I think it's a problem wherever you have this kind of outsourced aggregator relationship, like we have a lot of that in the funeral insurance space in South Africa. But I do think it comes down to a question of accountability, of responsibility for the outcomes. And I can say the line that we have taken in South Africa, for good or bad, is that the responsibility fair and squarely lies with the insurer, with the insurance company. So if they are using aggregators as part of their distribution mechanism, which might make very good sense from an efficiency perspective, that's fine as long as they retain full responsibility and accountability still for the fair treatment of their customers, because the relationship is still between the insurer or the contract, if you like, is still between the insurer and the ultimate policyholder. So I think it does come down to issues of governance, oversight, and being comfortable that the insurer has the proper controls in place.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. So just to repeat one of the aspects, the important aspects you raised, is what I call, let's say, background research. In German, there's a word Grundlagenforschung. I don't know how to translate that. That's all the very nerdy stuff that the theoretical physicians do, which in 100 years will translate into space travel, something like that. And I realize now, yes, that there's a lot of, if you want to get it right, you have to start with some time in advance, which is a challenge because most, let's face the fact, most index insurance we know is project driven. So you've got donors, be at the Global Index Insurance Facility or USAID or World Food Program and so on. But all these donor programs, and that's something I like to emphasize wherever I'm meeting supervisors as well, they have a limited shelf life. Even if it says World Bank somewhere, it doesn't mean we have unlimited funds and unlimited time. And I have the impression sometimes, now I'm thinking of Central America, let's say, that they think, well, if we don't get off the ground this year, they'll come again next year. Well, what's the problem? Well, sooner or later. That's not how it works. Huh? The way the financing of index insurance, as I've come to know it, has a limited shelf life. So this thorough research has been a luxury that we haven't always been able to engage in. But I wonder, by the way, how many students currently are doing their PhD or their master thesis on all these many questions? How does weather indices correlate with maize or coffee or this or that? So there's a lot of questions that I believe would interest the academia of every country, or the Cotton Institute, or the Maize Institute, or the Rice Institute that they have in different countries. Have we mobilized that well enough? And another thought is in respect of consumer understanding or awareness. Something I've been dreaming about for a long time is to launch the index insurance game, the as-if game. Is there something we can do? Defining some parameters, some indices, and then just offer it on social platforms, or what's it called, social networks, so that people who get wind of it and find it interesting say, okay, let's pretend I buy this index insurance, and then let's see what happens. I see that there's been a drought here, I see there's been a good year. Does it correlate with what I see here? So before you actually start selling this thing, and I know some projects include that, they call it dry run or something similar, which is awfully good, I think. Often it's done because they didn't get all their act together in time, so they have to do a dry run till the next planting season. But this is something that I wish we could see scale up continent-wide. It will have to be on mobile technologies, smartphones or cell phones or something, but that I believe is something that will or might help understand. Because, let me also share that, one problem with insurance is you cannot practice it very well. Eventually I learned that insurance is not so similar to microfinance as to mobile banking, perhaps, because it's a very abstract thing, sounds like an excellent idea, but hell, do I know what I'm doing here? How risky is that? The difference in mobile banking is we can get together in one room, I send you a couple of shillings, you send him a couple of shillings, he sends me a couple of shillings, I put some shillings in my mobile wallet, and after an hour, we're confident enough that we understood it, and then we can send 200,000 shillings to our mother back in the country. We can't do that with insurance so far. The closest I've seen is this mobile automatic insurance, whereby you don't really risk making a wrong decision and being the laughing stock of your village. And that allows you this market discovery, as they call it. Can we find smarter ways for market discovery of index insurance? I think we can, but I haven't seen it yet. Now this is also a very good segue to the next level of question dimension we want to add here. That's country experiences. You shared the South African experience. Oh, let me also add to address one of your things, one of the points you raised, something I've learned in Zambia. There's an insurance company or two in Zambia who combine the index trigger with actual on-the-ground loss assessment. So if the people in the village think the index has treated them unfairly, they can complain to the insurance company, and the insurance company says, okay, we're going to send somebody to assess. It's going to cost you $50. It's not free, because otherwise we're back at the conventional insurance thing. But if you're willing to pay that, and if you feel justified, then we're going to send somebody there. So that's a promising, nice way of combining these two things. Maybe drones or some other advanced technology, blockchain-based crowdsourcing will help make that more common. That as an example of other country case studies or country examples that I can contribute here. But I'd love to see more people coming up here and either discussing what we've been discussing so far or adding country-specific dimensions. Thank you. Thanks a lot, me and Agrotosh. Glad to see you here. Shall we say ladies first, or is there any good reason you have to push?
Okay, that's simple enough, thanks. I want to talk about client value and sustainability, specifically at the hand of Madagascar, where I've recently been. They have about 11 million adults, and they have about 4.5 million adults that in the past year suffered an agricultural shock, so either flood or drought. And it raises the question of value. Is agricultural index insurance really the product that's going to help these farmers manage their agricultural risks? Or are there actually other products that we need to think about? So when we're talking about value, we're not just talking about the lack of abuse. We're also talking about actually delivering value compared to alternatives, such as savings, such as remittances, etc. So I think we definitely need to think about agricultural index insurance in a broader spectrum of options that you've got to manage agricultural risk. And I think that begs the question that we need to have a bigger debate about who actually the target beneficiaries could be of agricultural index insurance. Are we really talking about the poorest of the poor farmers? And I'm not saying that middle-income farmers or slightly bigger farmers are not viable consumers or not consumers that actually need the product. I think that's definitely an important policy position to take, that you actually want to help your slightly bigger farmers as well. But I think it is important to think about who can we really viably reach with agricultural index insurance. And that also means maybe that it's not just the actual end farmer that we should be thinking about, but we should also be thinking about a broader spectrum of users and consumers in the agricultural ecosystem. Maybe the microfinance institution, that's critical to extend the credit, but if a flood hits and all their consumers default, they can manage to self-insure some of the risks, but they can't actually insure the bigger catastrophic risks. Maybe it's actually the gin or the cotton mill or one of those kind of institutions that are facing risks. And maybe they are more viable consumers of agricultural index insurance, especially if the farmers are really poor in their region. So I think we also need to think about a broader spectrum of beneficiaries for agricultural index insurance beyond just the individual farmer, that we can really deliver value to, as opposed to having kind of lofty policy ideals that are difficult to defend when we're thinking about the viability and the ultimate benefit. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mia. I can't resist making some comments there. On the one hand, to confirm the importance of the value chain approach. So what we've seen is helpful when you propose to launch index insurance somewhere is actually value chain studies. Who keeps how much money of a bag of roasted cashew nuts from Tanzania, let's say, or Mozambique? And you'll find that it's the roasters, in this case of Mozambique cashew nuts, it's the roasters, the packagers, the exporters who get most, I don't know, 60% or so. So for the cashew nut farmer, they keep maybe 10%, and everything else goes to some collectors, farm gate buyers. So they get a lot more money, which means two things. They've got more purchasing power for the insurance, and they've got more risk at all. The farmers, let's also face the fact, most farmers don't just farm. And if they farm, they don't just farm cashew nuts. They diversify themselves. But all the other players in the cashew nut value chain, or coffee or whatever, they have something at stake. So helping them understand that and highlighting that, I think may result in something good. We're just starting to do that. We don't have so many successful examples yet. We don't have an awful lot of examples of successful micro-index insurance, but they don't readily come to mind. The other thing is at the macro level as well. So talking to governments, and something I would just like to mention is governments do handouts to their farmers when something bad happens, and also to the city dwellers and to everybody in case of bad floods. But would it be a better way of doing that using insurance? Should governments consider the option to insure some of these risks? It would still be a policy for the Ministry of Agriculture, who would then get 5 million or 10 million or whatever to hand out to their herders or whoever. They would hand out money anyway. But the advantage is they could do that on more transparent structure, so these farmers or herders would have a better idea when to expect something or not. Right now it's very different if it's election season coming up or not election season coming up, and if you happen to be the home province of the incumbent president or not. The second thing is, if they use insurance instead of budget line handouts, they could transfer the risk outside of the country. So this is a dialogue that at the World Bank we started engaging here and there, but I think also the insurance industry, supervisors, insurers, insurance associations, could use whatever opportunity they have with their public sector counterparts to bring back this idea. There's good reasons for insurance companies for governments to insure. National governments, subnational governments. And lastly, insurance companies are very good at getting the money quickly and transparently to these people. Budget line items are nice, and they don't have the disadvantage that the premium disappears at the end of the year, but it's not always awfully transparent. Who gets what when? So I'll stop there.
Yeah, thanks. Well, just to share briefly, I know we'll talk about it tomorrow as well. But in terms of some of the experiences we've had from Zambia, Malawi, Tanzania, and 3 or 4 other countries in Africa, I think for us, it's certainly in Southern Africa, I would say, although it's very important, basis risk is something which is extremely relevant for index insurance. But I wouldn't, we don't lose any sleep over basis risk because of the way the products have been working so far over the last 4 years. We haven't had any significant basis risk issue. What we do lose sleep on over is various operational issues, which are extremely important. And I mean, sometimes I feel the conversation becomes a bit towards, weight towards index and the accuracy of it and basis risk. But just to give you a quick example, I mean, we've had, we've been working a lot with some of the governments in different countries, including Zambia and also in Nigeria. And some of the products which have been developed at quite a large scale, a lot of resources put in, some of the marketing which was done in Zambia where my colleagues personally went and had meetings with over 20,000 farmers. These were like political rallies, some of them. It was part of a major social protection program of the government of Zambia. And then at the end of the day, the insurance didn't take off. Why? Because the underlying structures which insurance was supposed to be linked to, so in the case of Nigeria, it was a loan program. In the case of Zambia, it was an input subsidy. It did not happen, or they did not happen on time. So I think in Zambia, farmers are still getting subsidies now, although the rains have finished from last season. So the point I'm trying to make is some of these operational issues, just kind of dwarfs the more technical, relevant but technical issues of the type of index and the accuracy of it and measurement of the basis risk and so on. But then having said that, I mean, I think, at the same time, on the technical side, I think the good, silver lining is that there is a lot of data that is now available. As Peter mentioned, we're living in the era of big data. So there's a lot of satellite-based data available. There's a lot of data from other sources available. But sometimes we also come across institutions which are essentially working in a very different way, where if you try to apply satellite data in that context, it doesn't really make sense. So just to give you an example, we were trying to obtain some weather data from an institution in Zambia, and then we couldn't because the floppy drive wasn't working. So I was like, okay, we'll come back when it is working. So similarly, I think also more seriously, I mean, one of the some of the missing pieces of data which is required for testing any good index is your loss history. So your damage ratios, your yield data. If you look at the quality of yield data, I would guess in most countries in Africa and Asia, it's abysmal. Sometimes you have the same yield being mentioned every year because essentially they're just copy-pasting the value from the last year. So those are worrying. Those are things which I think on the data side, there's a lot which can be done in terms of improving the yield data, the loss history data. And also, I think the point was mentioned earlier, I mean, the different public sector bodies also have to understand, the importance of how the data will be used in the insurance area. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Agrotosh. It's being pointed out to me that we're reaching the end of this session, and I hope you'll forgive me for cheating in one respect. The Fishbowl textbook requires me now to summarize this session, and I feel incapable of doing it because it was very varied, very rich. In fact, I'm delighted. I've been doing this in consultative forums like this for a couple of times now, and this has been my favorite. And I see that you've enjoyed it as well. So I hope with that you'll forgive me for not summarizing very neatly. I thank you very much for your ongoing interest, enthusiasm, for the cooperation of everybody who's been here and who's been there, and I greatly enjoyed it. That's got to be my summary now.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you to everybody who contributed to the discussion. It's good to hear that, well, it's quite a big task to hear all the questions that are still unanswered, but it's good to hear at least some solutions to some of the challenges and some encouraging initiatives that are happening. So just a few housekeeping matters before we close the session. Tonight, if you are going to there isn't time, unfortunately, after all of these discussions for you to go back to your own hotel and then to the Serena. So if you're going to the gala dinner, please catch the bus that's going to the Serena Hotel. And then for tomorrow morning, the buses will pick you up at your hotels at 7:30, so that we will be able to start at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. So please be ready at 7:30 to catch the bus. And my other request is please don't lose your badge. All of those little dots are important for tomorrow, so please bring your badges tomorrow. But thanks very much for all of your enthusiastic participation. It's really generated a lot of questions for me. And hopefully tomorrow we will be able to delve a little bit more deeply into some of the issues around designing products, and also how the regulator would look at some of the aspects of the product design in the product approval phase, just to look at the risks, the viability, and then also the client value. So to bring all of those three pieces together into a product that is sustainable over the long term. So thank you very much, and enjoy your evening.